Welcome to today's meeting of the Health and Social Care Committee at London Borough of Hillingdon. This meeting is being broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. The purpose of this committee is to monitor services provided by health partners in adult social care and review their performance. We also undertake in-depth reviews and witness sessions on specific topics and submit our findings to the decision-making cabinet. My name is Councillor Nick Denys and I'm chair of this committee. Before we start, I have some important housekeeping for everyone present. Please can you ensure your mobile phones are on silent, and I actually don't know if mine's on silent, so I will take my own advice. And yeah, put it on silent, thank you. We're not expecting a fire drill, and if their fire alarm does go off, please follow Nikki out of the building. Please keep your microphones muted when you aren't speaking, and then unmute to speak. And as chair, I will call on those to speak. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the agenda now. First of all, do we have any apologies for absence?
Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Cawthorne, who will be attending, but he'll be late.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Fantastic. The minutes of the last meeting. I have one comment, and then I'll ask if anybody else has other comments. I'd like to note that the adult social care market positions... Sorry, is this what we're changing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a change.
Sorry.
Chair, it's not a change so much as a...
clarification.
Yeah, clarification on a report from the last meeting.
Okay. It should be noted that the Adult Social Care Market Position Statement report on the 24th of July's agenda stated on page 31 that the capital income ceiling for receiving financial support from the Council in meeting assessed adult social care needs was just over £224,000, and this should have been just over £24,000. Anyway, the exact numbers will be in the minutes. But yeah, there was an extra zero added, which gave them a very misleading opinion. On page 54 of the same report, the capacity tracker stated that 45% was utilised by self-funders and 26% was funded by local authorities and the NHS. For clarity, the report should have stated that the remaining 29% related to care home beds utilised by people referred to by the council. And we wonder why people don't understand how the NHS is structured. But that was an important thing to clarify. Okay. Apart from that, does anybody else have any other comments on the minutes? No, are we all happy to move on? Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move to our main... oh, yes, sorry. Item 4. This part of the meeting is in public. Everything will be in public, thank you. So obviously it's recorded on the YouTube channel. Right, so we're going to move to our very important agenda item for today, which is hospice and end-of-life services in Hillingdon. And before I ask the people who we are scrutinising to introduce themselves, I just want to say that some of the committee members had a really powerful visit to Michael Sobel Hospice on Monday and talked to some of the patients and the doctors, and I know we've all been quite influenced by that and the stories we heard from those who are getting treatment. So I'm sure that'll feed into how we question and what we say. But so thank you for arranging that visit. But Steve Curry, you said you'd like to go first, so could you just introduce yourself and just talk about the first topic you wish to talk about?
Yes, I'm Steve Curry. I'm Chief Executive at Hillingdon Hospice, and thank you for inviting us here today to talk about this. What I wanted to talk about first was the sale of Lansdowne House, which is owned by Hillingdon Hospice in the south of the borough. There's been quite a lot of public concern about this, and I just wanted to clarify the situation in terms of what is happening and why the decision has been made. Lansdowne House is in Hillingdon. It is it's been a day hospice. It's never been a bedded unit, and we've currently operating 3 services from there, which is the lymphedema clinic, our emotional and psychological team, which provides both adult and children and adolescent counselling, bereavement counselling, and we have complementary therapy. We run a couple of groups from there as well. There's a friendship cafe once a week, and then we run a couple of groups on a regular basis to do with our lymphedema service at Tripudia, which is an exercise group, and our Legs 11 Club, which is a self-help group that we support patients who've finished the treatment with us in the clinic. The building it's a nice building. It's in nice grounds, but it is really underutilised. At any one time, we've only got 3 of the clinical rooms in use at any one time. It's costing us about 100,000 a year to run the building, and it does have a value in excess of 3.5 million. As a charity, we've got an obligation to make sure that we are using our assets effectively and maximise them for the benefit of for the use of our beneficiaries. And to be quite honest as well, virtually all hospices in the country, at least 2/3 of them, are running deficit budgets this year. There's some real challenges. It's been on the news quite a bit in terms of in the press. At Hillingdon Hospice, we've really clearly we do not want to cut any services. We have been making savings, and we've taken some staff posts out of our central and our fundraising team, but protecting the services is quite critical. So having a building that we can't develop into bed spaces as sitting there is not something we can hold. So the sale is about protecting the services. They will be relocated. They're not being cut. It's about protecting those services first, and then any sales from the resources from the sale will be used to develop other services in the borough.
Thank you very much, Steve. Does anybody have any questions related to that? Councillor Nelson?
Thank you, Nick. Steve, as you're well aware, a lot of the residents are very concerned about the hospice being closed and being sold off. What it is that you're going to replace that with, because obviously this is a service that's being provided in the south of the borough, and as you're well aware, we have no facilities in the south of the borough for hospice care. Also, at our residents meeting we had on the 12th, a lot of concerns was raised by some of the residents in regard to selling it off, and one of those was you were going to sell it to Heathrow Airport. You did try to clarify. You had conversation, but it is not a done deal. And therefore, I would like to know, for residents, raising some of our residents' concern, what is going to replace it, and where in the south of the borough are you going to invest that money into?
As you were at the meeting, I was upfront with the residents that we haven't got some final stage. We've got some interim options, which is in the paper here, in terms of if we haven't got any permanent property sorted out, premises sorted out before we sell, then we will be renting space in community buildings for our bereavement services, and the lymphedema service. We already deliver some of that at home base. We will do that from home base. We do need to get the building sold before we know how much resources we've got to play around for alternative. We are talking to partners, and that includes other health partners and Brunel University. We have a commitment to building to keeping the services in the south of the borough, and we're aware that in the paper we've got a breakdown of which services are used by which people from the borough, which wards are used in, and we want to make sure that we continue with that, because the reality is the other building will be in the north of the borough, which is the other far extreme of the borough.
I would like to know what it is that can be done in regards to, because you did indicate also that you did submit a planning application to extend the hospice with night bed care, and that came out of a meeting we had about 2 years ago in regards to the hospice being closed at Mount Vernon Hospital. So is there any feasibility of that happening, if it is possible for that to be revisited, and also make an application on that, because obviously it's a lot for residents who have contributed very much to the hospice in Hillingdon, but also it's a very dear place to a lot of people, and a lot of our residents in the south of the borough would appreciate that you reconsidered not selling the property, but look at other ways and how it can be extended and what can be done to do that. I will put that question also to Keith, because Keith is part of the HHCP. You have the fundings, or I think you're the one who make the fundings. And obviously the charity, it's a charity, but the NHS, Northwest London, they also are using beds and supply beds. What it is that you're going to do to enable the hospice to continue as it is in the south, if it's possible or feasible to get that done.
In terms of the use of the building, we actually started planning applications before Michael Sobel Hospice closed, because we were looking at opening some nurse-led beds in the south of the borough at that point in time. When Michael Sobel closed, that was a really vital sort of service, so we got involved to reopen it. And then following COVID, just recently, in the last year of 18 months, we've been looking at restarting the planning application there. We have approached the planners again, and we had spent quite a significant amount of money and had quite a lot of reports done prior to us pulling out of that planning application. We've informed at this point in time the planners would not support that. There are several reasons. It's quite complex because we're right next door to a Grade 1 listed church with around us are several listed trees. We're in a conservation area and we're on the edge of the green belt. We have at the board level, we had talked about whether we would take a chance to fight that. The reality is that would take time to follow it through. And that was fine when we were talking about, to be honest, a year ago, 18 months ago. The cost of living inflation has some impact on us that we can't wait another 2 or 3 years without the funding to keep things going, to move it forward. To hold the building open, we would have to close some services, so that is not really acceptable to us. And the other issue is, which is why Heathrow was mentioned, is that where we're at is that if we did rebuild, if runway 3 goes ahead, then we would be within quarter of a mile of the end of the runway and within the flight path, which would not be appropriate, would then have to be relocated. The issue then is in terms of, because we'd have to do fundraising for that, so that's the other side of it, as well as in terms of fundraising and looking for large capital grants for a project that may only have a short-term life to be relocated. And Heathrow have at this stage of turned down a request to purchase. Or not purchasing it.
So, Keith, would you like to make a comment before, and then we can move on to the next item that we can discuss?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Nelson, for the question. So, my name is Keith Spencer. I'm the Managing Director of Hillingdon Health and Care Partners, and Harlington Hospice are a partner within Hillingdon Health and Care Partners as part of H for All, and they are the they are the lead organisation for end-of-life care in Hillingdon, which is quite unique that a charity leads the statutory sector. I think what I would say, and I think what's important to clarify, is we need to separate the building from the services. And to reassure people listening at home, the services that are currently provided out of Lansdowne Road will continue. There is no threat to those services. They will continue to be provided in the broad locality in which they're currently based, and that's what Steve is articulating. And I think what I wouldn't want people to get the message is that services are under threat, because that is not true. I think that's a really important thing to say, and certainly in the conversations that we've had as a partnership, that's not the case. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? People always associate the word hospice with beds, and the whole point that Steve has made is that Lansdowne has never had any beds, so nothing is being. There's never been any beds, but there are 3 services that we will protect as part of that, and I think that's just an important part. And organisations, local authority, health, sell buildings all the time, and as long as the services are not threatened, that's the key part of this. I'm completely supportive of what we're doing here, and I think, Chair, obviously we move on. End-of-life services are a success story, and there is more investment going into end-of-life services in Hillingdon than ever before. And I'd hate people sitting at home thinking that we're at the thin end of a wedge in terms of funding of those services. But I'm sure Steve will articulate that
Okay, well,
a bit later.
Thanks, Keith. And I think I now want to move on to the next part of what we're going to talk about. But obviously, if within that issues arise about what's happening with the sale and also South Borough, then questions can come back to. One point I would like to make though is that those who are unhappy about this generally have a lack of confidence about services in that part of Hillingdon for the issues that we know about. So I think what is extremely important is what you talked about here in terms of services still being provided and those outcomes being good for the people in the south of the borough needs to be evidenced, and we would certainly be interested in that, because while services are separate to buildings provide a level of security and comfort to people. So I think there's a very important bit for us as a committee to be interested in, to make sure that those promises are kept, but also for the residents there to not add this to the list of things promises that have been broken. So we will take a further interest in this. I think that's fair to say, and expect further reports on this in the future. But if it's possible, as I said, I'm happy for this to come back if it's necessary. But could we now sort of have what you wish to say about the general hospice and end-of-life services in Hillingdon and how that might be changing?
Okay. There's a paper being shared with you earlier on, and it's been available to the public on the website, so anybody will go back to it. And I'll use this as a guide to follow it through. And I was just rereading it when the request was to feedback in terms of how we rate Hillingdon compared to other areas, parts of North West London. So when I go through this, I will update you on that one, because I realised I hadn't put that into the paper. As Keith said, we're working in partnership around end-of-life care in Hillingdon, and yes, the hospice is lead, and I'm the senior responsible officer who's accountable for this. So although some of these other services are not provided by Hillingdon Hospice, I am able to talk about them because I'm overseeing what we're doing, and we're working very much in partnership. And it is very much because the reality is end-of-life care is about fixing bits of different types of care together to meet with what people need. It's when we did rebranding recently in Hillingdon, we actually chose the strapline of Shape Your Care, because not everybody wants the same care. So what I've got, I'll just do a summary. So we have things like that every area in North West London has. It's a specialist palliative care service. In Hillingdon, that's provided by CNWL. We do have a 24-hour specialist palliative care nursing response team, and who will do a 2-hour visit during the day. That is not in every area in North West London. That was something that Hillingdon pulled together with some funding from social finance about 7 years ago, and we're still actually wheeled out as one of their best projects ever in terms of putting it together. We've got we've recently starting some continuing healthcare funding, and that Hillingdon Care, which is the domiciliary care provider from Hillingdon, which we are looking at how can we help to move people out of hospital faster, because one of the areas we've identified is that people don't know when they want to leave and you're end of life, you need to move fast, you can't wait, particularly if you're in the last days of life. And we've been running a pilot on that one, and that's just been agreed for us to cover that one forward. And as well as that, we do some respite care services as well for carers who are actually in the end of life, and that they are fast tracked. That carers respite is funded by the Borough Council and rather than the health. We have a hospice at home night service that Hillingdon runs, which is very similar to, it's identical to the Marie Curie service that's provided in the rest of the country. We can have a registered nurse or an experienced healthcare assistant to be in a person's home overnight, and that tends to be within the last days of life. It's to give the family a rest, but also prepare the family for the person dying, because it's very different caring for somebody who you think is a long-term care situation compared to somebody caring for somebody who's going to be dying. And a lot of our staff, is a very valued service, because our staff spend a lot of time with patients, families, talking about what to expect. It's not just about caring for the individual, the patient, it's about supporting the family as well. Then we've got the inpatient unit at Michael Sobel House. We've got 14 beds there at the moment. 10 of them are commissioned acute beds, and we have them all over the North West London. And I did do a quick calculation on that one. There's 36 hospice beds across North West London, and if you do that per patient, registered patient, it's about 1 for every 42,000 patients. Our 10 beds in Hillingdon is 1 for every 31 patients. Up to fairly recently, that's all we had. We were under a lot of pressure to deal with waiting lists, etc. So what we've done is we've added 4 additional beds, which are more long-term nurse-led beds, which are funded out of continuing healthcare, and that's been really interesting. Fetching them on board is meant that we've actually, when we compare the first 4 months of this financial year to last financial year we admitted 53 people in those 4 months. In the first 4 months of this year, we admitted 96, which is a significant step forward. One thing I'm particularly proud of is that one of the things we were aware of is having a waiting list meant that people who needed the service weren't always able to get it. In those first 4 months of last year, 8 people died while waiting for admission. This month, the first 4 months of this year, we've had 1 person die. We've been able to follow it through. Our occupation level has gone down a little bit. It's gone down 9%, but the turnover has increased significantly. The people who've died in the hospital has only gone up by 10, but the number of people we've actually supported in terms of discharge to home or to care home has gone up from 19 to 58. And that's the thing for me, so that most people think the hospice is the place to go to die. But actually, what happens as a team with Ros and her team, they will stabilise people and they're able to get them home, and that's following it through. We're the only hospice in North West London with the enhanced beds there. We've also got 8 enhanced nursing home beds with additional support put in by CNWL, Hospice of Palliative Care consultant, and the team at the hospice. We've got 8 of them, 2 at Hayes Cottage in the south of the borough, 6 at Parkfield Nursing Home in Uxbridge. And we are the only part of the North West London that's got that. In fact, in the review that's come out at the moment, each of the areas are being asked to set that one up because it's been seen as a good practice side of things. We have a 24-hour advice line, which is run from Michael Sobel, which is fairly standard for most hospices. We've got our children and bereavement support service, which we've been running for about 5 years now, and that came out of a real need. When we don't care for children, but we care for their parents, their grandparents are dying, and we do have a lot of young people who are dying in our services, both in the home or in the inpatient unit. And that's become quite critical for us. So actually, we're dealing, and the team there, we have a professional team of psychotherapists, art therapists who work with those individuals. And that team has developed a fairly unique speciality, as they're working with the only services working in the country with neurodiverse children around bereavement. And I'll get you some national recognition on that one. We've got an information advice line, and it's also got a service directory attached to it called HPAL, which Ros actually pulled together, and if you need any questions on that one. And that is available across North West London, because we developed it and we've rolled it out for the whole of North West London. So that was paid for by Hillingdon Hospice. And then there's the adult bereavement service, which we get some support from the Borough Council, for, the local authority, the NHS for. What I want to say is that all of those services have a degree, to some degree, charitable income supporting them. So we do get money from the NHS, and there's been recent concerns about NHS not increasing the funding. We have had an increase in North West London of 300,000 this year, so that's really helping us in terms of following it through. But we still have to raise 2.5 million to keep those services going, which is why we're constantly reviewing what we're doing with resources. You asked us to give a breakdown of the by ward, which I've got there. And then you asked me to talk about whether we're meeting the need or not. We've done a lot of research and a lot of using a lot of data. Keith is a very data-driven person, and working with Keith, I've learned how to use data much more effectively about identifying where the gaps are. So we've done a lot of research in Hillingdon, within Hillingdon Health Care Partners, end of life has been one of our 3 top priorities for about 3-4 years now. So we've had patient feedback, we've used the health data, and we've also been visiting lots of other hospices around the country to find out what we need to do to improve those services. What we do know is in Hillingdon we've got a lot of really good services, and if you get into those services you get a really good quality of services. But it is very much down to who you know, the information that individual people know, your GP, your district nurse, or who you might know yourself. So it's very much based on personality rather than systematic approach. And the feedback we've been getting, and particularly when we had Health Watch do some research for us as well, is the biggest issue is around lack of coordination of services. So we've been working for the last couple of years on developing a new model of care, which is we've been doing a lot of research on. And this is very much about coordinating all the services, bringing those services together, and also starting to move to systematically identifying patients early on, and so we can provide that support. Because all the research shows that if you identify people soon enough and provide the support all the way through to them and to their families, particularly for the family members who are, because quite often it's about anxiety, you're worried about something, it's 3 a.m. when you need some advice, and that's the time when people end up in hospital. And we have done some research using North West London database. Ross and I worked with them to help identify and build a North West London end-of-life dashboard, and we do know from that now that we know there's about 3,700 people in the borough would benefit from palliative care. That's quite early from early identification, but if we can do that early identification, they're more likely to get the care that they need. So we've now got a new patient pathway which there's a diagram in there, and we've worked on a new clinical model. And this clinical model is not to replace the services that are already there, but to make sure that coordination is there, and that once a person's been identified, is that them and their family are supported for the rest of their life journey following it through. And we've already started some of that work in terms of bringing some of the teams together to create the PIC service, which stands for Palliative Integrated Care Services. It doesn't trip off the tongue very easily. And we've done things like the hospice. We've moved on to the same IT system as CNWL. We're working much more closely with all of the providers in the borough, pulling that together, and that's working really well. From us as a hospice, just talking separately from rather we know that we checking the data. We know about 20% of the people who benefit from our services, and we only support about 17% of those. But we don't want to duplicate services that are already provided, so it's about utilising our particular skills and expertise. So the service gaps that we're focusing on are things like additional hospice beds, and that's about hospice care. For us, is not necessarily about the medical care. It's about that wraparound support. It's having those difficult conversations, supporting family. How do you, if your partner is dying and you've got young children, what do you say to them? How do you talk to them? How do you work that through? How do you build memories for that family as they're going forward? So that's what we were looking very much at. That's why we increased the number of beds we're doing. We do want to increase the number of bed spaces, and also looking at how we can support people at home, provide more services at home. We are looking at additional resources we can pull in and pull together, and how can we actually maximise the resources out of all of the services we've currently got. Money's tight. There isn't no magic money tree. We get the odd bits of extra. We'll apply for everything we've got at the moment. We can do it at the moment, but we need to reduce duplication. We need to reduce transaction activity, and that's and follow through. So that's the sort of summary of the paper we've got there.
Wasn't following my own advice about putting on the microphone. Thank you. What I suggest we do now is Michael, Breen and Ross, if you could just introduce yourselves, just so we know who you are, and what questions might be directed to you. And then what I was thinking of doing is maybe opening up for questions, and then giving people an opportunity at the end to also, of the panel, if we don't ask questions, then there's information you wish to share with us, you can come back to us. Does that sound like a good way of going forward? Are we happy with that? Okay, so Michael, if you could introduce yourself first.
Sure. So I am Michael Breen. I'm Chair of the Board of Trustees at Michael Sobel House and at Hillingdon Hospice Association. I first became a trustee at Michael Sobel at the time that the unit was closed, so I understood just exactly how needed that service was. Once I got involved, once we got the unit reopened, and we worked very closely with Hillingdon, I realised the rest of those services that Steve's just been describing. And I felt that I learned much more about the wider need. And I was very impressed as well with the fact that Hillingdon had given Steve the backing in order to go out and work in these various partnerships, which are so integral to it. That's why I'm involved. That's why I'm here backing him. Anything else, please ask questions.
Excellent. And when questions are asked, everyone, all the panel are free to jump in as well. So, Ross, could you introduce yourself as well? Thank you.
Yes, I'm Dr. Ros Taylor. I've been a palliative physician for about 32 years. Previously, I have been a chief executive of a hospice in Hertfordshire, which we rebuilt during my time there. And I've also worked nationally as clinical director at Hospice UK, which is a national charity. So I've got an overview of what's happening in palliative care nationally. And I guess I just wanted to say that at the start of my career, hospice beds were just about last days of life, cancer only, and there's been a massive change. We know from the demographics people are living longer with multiple conditions. Everybody, wherever you live or die, deserves better end-of-life care. And I know that the councillors who were very welcome when they visited on Monday, you met some younger patients, a 38-year-old gentleman who's still having active cancer treatment but has come into the hospice for probably 2 or 3 weeks for us to help him with pain. And he's pretty representative. So there's now 2 big populations needing palliative care or acute palliative care. There's the younger patients with complications, which I feel only we could address. He's been in NHS facilities for a long time without those issues being addressed, but also the older, frailer, multiple conditions for which we're planning for the future. And you've read about our vision for a university hospice at Brunel. But at the moment, I think the work, as Steve said, is to really coordinate the existing services to provide. I like the term wraparound care because that's what we're doing, but we need to reach way more than 20% of the people who could benefit.
Thank you very much. I'm going to make a quick observation, and I've got one specific question, but I was speaking to Councillor Martin before this meeting, and he had an observation which I thought was very good, and my question sort of builds better on his observation. So after I made my observation, I'll come to you to ask your question. But one of the things that I felt very powerfully when I went round Michael Sobel Hospice is the care you're providing is for the families as much as it is for those in there. And in some senses, the patients, I don't really want to call them patients, but the people in there who are getting treatment were sort of like the most bullish and active, and it was actually the families, I think, as well, who really appreciated the whole sort of experience. And one of the big takeaways that I took away from my visit is we talk about healthcare, but a lot of the time we focus on health treatment. Actually, what was really highlighted was the importance of care, and maybe that doesn't happen in other places as much as it should because of the focus of treatment, and that was one of the certain special things I found when I went to visit around. So that is my observation. Oh, by the way, our clerk, Nikki, has made a really good note of positive experiences and areas for improvement from our visit. So if it's okay with you, Nikki, I'd like to append that to the minutes of this meeting because I think it's important for people who want to read them. So they have been anonymised. So, but yes, so that was my observation. So, Councillor Martin, would you like to ask the thing we were talking about earlier?
On point 6, with the hospice service gap, you've also mentioned that you're reaching out to 20% of people that require the care and providing it to 17%. What's happening to the other 80%? Are they just coping quietly within their family units, or are they just not coming forward for care? Just curious where they are and what they're getting.
Okay. I'll start the question. Yeah, start the answer. The reality is they're actually in either mainstream hospital or district nurses supporting them at home, GPs. But the reality is right across the country, the majority of people do die in hospital, despite the fact majority of people do not want to die in hospital. And that's where people are ending up. When we did the back testing on the people identified in the new end of life dashboard, people are 6.5 times more likely to be admitted as an unplanned admission out of that group. And if they turn up at hospital, they are almost 95% likely to be go from A&E in there. And once you get in, because you're ill, you will, once they start doing the diagnostics, they will always find something to be treated. Ross might be a bit more deep on that. So people end up being in longer, and some people unfortunately are treated to death. There is a proportion of people who we will never be able to get to because there'll be sudden deaths and things like that as well. So you have to balance that out as well. It's not 100% opportunity.
But the converse of that is that if you're referred to palliative care particularly early, and we are sadly seeing very late referrals, you are much more likely to end your days where you want to be. The research shows that you'll be less depressed, your pain will be better, you'll be where you want to be, and your family will have a better bereavement. So that's why we need more community palliative care services as well as beds.
Thank you. And almost planned, my question fits in very nicely with that. And I think this question is going to be mainly based towards Keith and Michael because it's about funding. Now, just reading off the note that Nikki did here, she says areas for improvement. When in hospital, it feels like you're on your own. It's very lonely. And to be honest, there were some comments about, obviously, better space in Michael's Sober Hospice and all that sort of stuff. But the real main complaint was how people in a situation where they're in a very serious situation or possibly even guaranteed to know that they're going to pass away quite soon were left in hospitals which weren't interested in or felt like they weren't interested in their care. And it made me think that actually we need to do our best to give these people the care that they deserve and the family the care that they need. And then Councillor Kelly picks up on that statistic and you think, wow, there's a whole load of people who are not getting what they should get. Now, I look at the funding model and it almost feels like to me the NHS are going, oh yes, that's charity fundraising doing a nice thing over there. No, this should be part of the NHS, definitely. So in terms of the plan in the papers, which anyone online who's watching I recommend to read, and also the consultation that North West London ICB are doing, they seem very good. But how are we going to fund something that really we should be doing as a society? So, Keith, if I can go to you first maybe, because obviously I don't want to say you're the NHS representative, but you're definitely linked into the whole sort of funding model. And then, Michael, if you could then talk about your sort of perception of funding as a board member of the hospice, that would be really useful.
Thank you for that question, Councillor. We could spend the rest of the evening, I think, probably debating that. So, the biggest challenge we have, what Steve hasn't said, is the biggest challenge we have is integrating care across organisational boundaries. And you focus on the hospital interface, and the honest answer is we hold on to patients in hospital for too long. And we did a recent piece of work over the last 2 months where we had staff from the hospice going into the hospital, helping them with their discharge. It was using the discharge piece. And what's clear is that we still have some way to go in terms of the cultural changes that are needed to say, actually, this patient can go home or can go to the hospital and be looked after. And actually, if they didn't spend as long in a hospital bed, and I'm getting down to your funding question, if we took a day off, 2 days off, that frees up resource that we can move into a different setting. But we do have some cultural challenges, actually, because obviously some of our clinical colleagues in the hospital, for good reasons and noble reasons, believe that sometimes the best place for patients is in a hospital bed. But it isn't, and it isn't their choice. So the work that we have to do is work with the hospital, and there are other interface issues up there, and that's the gritty work that literally Steve is doing, and you spend most of your time now working with colleagues at the hospital, trying to change that culture trying to stop us hanging on to people. And that's why we're integrating the services. That's why we're trying to have one team so that we use those resources flexibly. And then the funding will follow. Because my view is we're already spending the money. It's just in the wrong place. So it's about more money is the bit we're trying to leverage here. But it's hard work. It really is hard, gritty work that we're trying to do. And you've been too kind, I think, in terms of not being clear that there are also real issues here, challenges we're dealing with.
I think this is an issue we're probably going to come back to. One thing that's very loud and clear to me in the answer, and it's not because you've given it, it's because of the reality you're facing. There's a conversation between professionals when really what we're talking about is what's best for patients. And I'm not, it's a complicated structure in the NHS and stuff, but I think other committee members might have some interest in this area, so we'll probably come back to it. But in the meantime, Michael, can you talk to us about fundraising and funding, really, what the ambition should be to give those people the care that they deserve?
Of course. Well, I agree actually very much. It's a difficult position that the whole care services in, particularly hospices. We at Michael Sobel are no different to other hospices, but we try to be in relation to how clever can we be with the money that we do have. As Steve mentioned, we get some contracts from basically NHS, and a lot of the Harlington care came that way. Not all of it was fully funded, so there had to be some fundraising that includes shops and generally, chugging, if you like, asking people to give you money. At Michael Sobel House, it's somewhat different. The charity there was very much a friends of charity, so they did their best to raise as much money, but they didn't have a commitment to actually deliver budgets, to meet the budgets of cost. So when we came together with Harlington to reopen the unit, we had to try and escalate that. That was difficult for a few reasons. One is, I'd say we weren't particularly good at it. We did just what we could do, and the people who did it all for the right reasons. Their emotions and attachment and passion were fantastic, but it needed to be professionalised, and that's, you can't do that just by clicking your fingers. And then we encountered a thing called COVID. So we literally got the unit open, I think, in the January, and COVID came upon us. Well, I think it actually came upon us before January, but I think we recognised it in March 2020. Then we had to actually adjust quite difficultly into handling funding, because you couldn't meet with people, you couldn't see people. A lot of our supporters were of an age where they didn't want to come out, and even if it was just to meet one person and socially distance. So that created a gap. And then, as Steve quite rightly mentioned, we've seen inflation go through the roof in relation to utilities, in relation to salaries. We aren't the NHS, but we pretty much have to match the NHS salaries, otherwise we won't attract the people, or we won't keep the people. So what we currently have is not comfortable. Our last year end will deliver about a £500,000 deficit, 400 and something £1,000 deficit, and our current budget is for a £500,000 deficit. We can't continue in that way. And while colleagues are actually working hard to make these changes, it's not going to happen quickly enough for us. So that explains, I think, why we had to look at our assets. What are our assets? And Lansdowne House is an asset. It is a place rather than it is the service. And I echo what Steve and Keith said. It's the service that we need to actually concentrate on. So at Michael Sobel, we took a very difficult decision in December last year. Steve came to me, and then we took it to the board. He's spoken with it with his clinical colleagues, and we decided that we could not and would not reduce services. A lot of hospices have. A lot of hospices are closing their doors, but they literally, one by one, and if you're on any kind of social media, you'll see it, they literally are announcing they're having to cut services. Steve and I met with two other hospices only last week in the North London. They're both working on deficit budgets, and they agree they can't continue to do that. You could try and balance it. What Lansdowne House will achieve for us by the sale of it is a reprieve on our cash flow difficulties, because they're quite acute, and the more months that we go by, they're going to become more and more acute. We depend upon public, we depend upon legacies you can't budget for because you just don't know when they're going to come in. So we need to actually release that asset in order to ensure that our services can continue, we've cut backroom costs as much as we possibly can. You get to a stage where there's nothing further to cut. And I think we're pretty much at that stage. And that's why, although we received recommendations from the executive team, we as a board had to consider it and decide whether it was the right thing to do. And we decided that having an underutilised asset that was actually costing us money, as Steve says, it's costing us about £100,000 a year, and it's less than 30% utilised. It has to be sold. Now, I know how much that actually is affecting people who were using the day services there in the past, who were connected to it by having fundraised to it, by donating money, etc. But the most important thing for us, I think, and for everyone, and all the people that we want to be able to reach out and wrap around, is to be here. We need to make sure we're here. And then we need to advance our plans into the future. And our plans into the future are to create more beds in the borough. That will take some capital fundraising, and that's a different game entirely. And it takes a little bit longer to plan. But we're talking with people such as Brunel in order to be able to plan for it. Those plans will need to get funding outside of normal, asking people to give us money. We'll probably need to go for some kind of funding from social finance organisations who raise money ordinarily through charities to assist the social need, the social services need, the care need. In order to do that, we need to have some kind of liquid balance sheet rather than a rather nice lump of bricks and mortar and very little cash, because no one, I'm an accountant by trade and a businessman by action, no one wants to put money into something where the money's so skinny that it could all go wrong. So we need to have released some reserves, which is what we're aiming to do. That will buy us time. That will buy us the ability to talk to those other people. That will allow us to not just sustain what we're doing as Michael Sobel and Harlington, but actually then grow it. And that growth is definitely needed, to your point. If there's 80% of the people out there that we're not dealing with, who is? And it shouldn't be hospital beds. It is, well, mainly. It shouldn't be. We all know that when Michael Sobel closed, the patients that were in the units were actually moved into active hospital wards. Active hospital wards, I think, as was described by yourself, Chairman, and by Ross, they want to treat you. That's what they're there for. Okay? When you're dying, you need to plan for the dying. You need to work with people around you who care. Again, taking your word, who care. Right? And that's what happens in the hospice. So that, I hope that answers your question, but I think it's demonstrating it's difficult, but we have plans.
No, that's very good. Thank you very much. Councillor Cawthorne, welcome to the meeting. I know you were slightly delayed because you were representing the Mayor. Do not grab the mic just yet, because there are two other you've indicated speaking. There are two other councillors ahead in the queue, but you will get your chance. But thank you for coming to the meeting. Councillor Punja, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I echo what has been said here, but I also wanted to pay tribute to the work that you do at Michael Sobel's and Hillingdon Hospice. Monday's visit really opened my eyes to the level of the relationships that your staff and you have with the people that are there was phenomenal, and it felt like people were talking to family. And I have utmost respect for that kind of relationship that you've been able to build and support the people that there. So I would like to pay tribute to that first and foremost. Some of the questions kind of have been answered, but I just want to draw back on this thing of funding because, Michael, thank you so much for being here. I understand your position being chair of a charity myself and the difficulties that charities are facing at the moment. However, I want to then take my conversation to you, Keith, because your answers, for me, we need to do a bit more. And when 300,000 is about not even a fifth of the budget that the palliative care sector needs to raise in Hillingdon Hospice, Michael Sobel, in this sector, it's not, and yet they are providing that vital service that takes people out of hospitals into that sector, and yet there is 83% still in that sector. Saying that there needs to be a cultural change, for me, is just not good enough. There needs to be a directive change more than a cultural change, because we are talking about people's lives and how they spend their lives. We're also talking about people's tax-paying money that is going into the NHS, keeping people in the system rather than moving them out of the system into what is clearly needed. And therefore, if the expansion of the service is to need beds, isn't there a way that that directive can be pushed towards funding more beds, which clearly you're saying we're having the money anyway, we've got the money, it's just been directed in the wrong place, so therefore it's a directive issue and not a cultural issue. The cultural issue can change because at the end of the day, topics change one day we're talking about dealing with a treatment in this way, and then another day we're dealing with treatment in a different way. So, and as technology changes, we do that anyway. So I'm going to ask you, how can the NHS be funding less than a fifth of the money needed by this hospice to provide the care for the residents, not across one borough, but predominantly potentially across 3 boroughs?
So we live in a system which has a significant financial deficit, runs a deficit of 40-50 million, and that largely sits at our hospital. So from a standing point, we are in a difficult place from a funding perspective. I agree with you to a point. So you need both. You need a directive point, but you need to bring people's hearts and minds, clinical hearts and minds with you, because actually if you don't have the latter, change doesn't happen. We've got the full support of the hospital in making that change. It's not a problem. If Tina Benson were here from the hospital, she would say, we're with you. This is the right thing to do. But clinical decisions on a Saturday and Sunday get made not by chief executives and by chief operating officers. They get made by clinicians on wards, and they're the people that we have to work with to change, because they're the people we have to persuade to discharge earlier and to make that change. The resources and the money follow. That's the easy bit. And what we wrestle with is those hearts and minds. I've had Claire Murdoch here today from CNWL. She would say the same thing. You've got my backing. Make the change happen. You still need to have the hearts and minds of the clinicians to do that. So we have to do both. I'm agreeing with you. We have to do both, and we work every day to make that change happen. And we have a plan, which we've talked about here before, in order to do that. And Steve works hard on that all the time. So I'm with you, completely with you. But we do need both. It's not just a top-down approach here. We've got to have hearts and minds of clinicians to make this change happen.
Apologies, I'm going to jump in with a question here, and then I'll go to Councillor Chamdale, because you're next, and then we can come back to other ones. But one of the things we heard loud and clear from those we've spoken to was, if only I knew about this earlier, I would have done this. Oh, I found out about this by accident. Oh, I found out about this when I got referred to a palliative care nurse, knew all about it, but I didn't know about it before. We heard that so much. So, and again, a system, the NHS is a system, I completely appreciate that, but obviously patient need and patient desire should be very, very important in that system. Why, and Keith can answer this first, and then I'll go to you, Ros. There is a big problem in people not being told that this is an option. Now, how can that be fixed?
So what we're doing at the moment is we're working with the hospital as we speak about how we change that approach. And what we're working on, an integrated management system, where actually we manage the staff across hospital and hospice and individual with one team, with one manager, so we can make that, to put your hand, to make that directive change happen. So that's the work literally Steve is doing at this point in time. So we're all saying the same thing. I'm not disagreeing with anything anybody is saying. But our job is to make it happen. And the making it happen bit actually takes time to do in what is a very complex system. But we are closer to it now than we've ever been. And the things you've heard Steve talk about wouldn't have been possible a year, 2 years ago. So we are making significant progress on this one. But we're not there, is the honest answer. And I'm fairly sure, Chair, that you'll hold me to account in future meetings and saying, where are we now on that journey? And actually, I think it would be helpful. It would be helpful for us when we have this discussion next time in palliative care, if actually we also had colleagues in the hospital who said, because then we could have a proper a proper discussion about it, because I think increasingly it is about integrated care, and Harlington Hospice are not just the only people turning the wheel on this. We need all the providers to do that. So.
And we appreciate that, and we do appreciate, I mean, I'm learning a lot from talking to you guys about this, and I know we all are, and I think, this is something we'll come back to. But Ros, you wanted to come in on this as well.
Yes, just 2 points. Last year, I led an audit across the 5 hospices in North West London. We looked at 20 consecutive admissions to each hospice, so that was 100 patients, and we looked at the ones particularly who'd come from hospital and how long they'd been in hospital before they were referred to the hospice. And it was an inordinately long time for people who'd been in for weeks. Nobody had had conversations about what's next, what matters to you, where do you want to be. And we hear this story again and again, as you heard on Monday, that people wonder why they haven't been referred earlier. And having worked in the sector for so many years, it is so difficult to understand why people aren't advocating for themselves, or why hospital doctors are not referring people earlier. But I did hear from one of the geriatricians at Hillingdon Hospital last week. She said all of her colleague geriatricians, many of whom are looking after dying patients, just are not aware of the services in the community and in the hospice. So we've just got to raise our profile to change those hearts and minds. But it is shocking, because the services have been around for ages. So it is awareness, marketing, however. So we are arranging a round table with all the geriatricians and some of the other specialists, because they're simply not referring early enough. So that is hearts and minds. And however directive you are, it's down to those individual clinicians saying to patients, this is what I recommend.
I feel like getting a megaphone standing outside Hillingdon Hospital, or throwing orange paint at something. That seems to be what's fashionable nowadays in terms of protesting. But anyway, we'll come back to this sort of stuff. It's very interesting. So, Councillor Chemdale.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel, for coming along, which is quite an emotive subject and area, and we're learning a lot. On page 14, it says that 71% of patients did not have an advanced care plan, and if they had one, they wouldn't need to be in hospital. So whose responsibility is it for that care plan?
Answer that. It's everybody's responsibility. So it starts with a GP. As soon as people are recognised as having maybe a life-limiting illness, which could be anything from heart disease to COPD, not just cancer, which used to be the main referral to palliative care. So there is now across London something called the Universal Care Plan, which everybody is being encouraged to fill in. So it starts with GPs. The situation is that at the moment it's mainly palliative care people, nurses, doctors, filling in these care plans, which help paramedics, for instance, if they're called out 999, to know what the patient's wishes are and to try and follow those. So the numbers of people having plans, but it starts with a conversation at the kitchen table within families about what do you want to do if things get worse. And those are the conversations as a society we're not very good at having. I remember, for instance, my mother, who is sadly no longer with us, she said if her health condition got worse, she wanted no tubes. So that meant she didn't want drips or dialysis or feeding tubes, but that really helped us as a family to know her wishes. And those are the conversations that we need to be having. It starts at home, but then healthcare professionals need to record those conversations, and we need to record them electronically. And it's a fantastic system across London now, but the plans are often filled in too late, maybe after people have got into hospital where they don't want to be. So, Universal Care Plan.
Thank you. Councillor Cawthorne.
Thank you. What I'm about to ask may have been asked before, so please say if it has and I'll shut up, but conscious I arrived a bit late. I've got a couple of things, if I may. The first relates to, I suppose, the bigger picture. So we heard from you on Monday, Steve, didn't we, about the care pathway that's being rolled out in Hillingdon, and obviously you've authored this report and you've spoke at some length about what you're looking to achieve. and obviously part of that is extending the bed-based provision, which I think we recognise from Monday is something that's important. And yet at the same time we've got the North West London ICB with a somewhat different view of the world, which seems to think that there's a requirement for less of a bed-based provision, if I've got that right. Not quite sure how they both align, those two separate perspectives. Bear in mind that Hillingdon ICB presumably has some input into what the North West London ICB think. I'm struggling to reconcile those two things. Can you help me out, please? Let's do that one first.
I'll start, then Keith can tell you the real answers afterwards. The review that was done at North West London was quite narrow. It was to look at specialist palliative care in the community. So it was looking at specialist palliative care teams, nursing teams supporting people at home, and hospice beds. And they got funding to review it and to look at a new commissioning model, a new model of care. And they did bring in consultants, expertise. All of the teams across North West London, specialist palliative care teams, were involved in that, all the hospices and the NHS providers. But it was very clear that they had a very tight, defined remit. And then, so things, when they were looking at how many bed spaces we needed, what they did was the consultants looked across the country to see how many bed spaces were in different parts of the country per 100,000 of the population. And then they worked it out and then referring it back to the population of West London. And they came up with the fact we were probably 17% over-provided. But the trouble with that is they were looking at a system, a part of the system in isolation. Because hospices, the hospice model that we want to get away from is the traditional hospice model, which is very high cost, small units, moving to a much more sort of a hybrid between a commercial nursing home and the hospice side of things. But they're talking about hospices that were built, most of them 20, 30 years ago, and were not being built to meet the needs now, and we're not looking at the wider need. And the sadness for me was that in North West London we have the WISIC database. It's got all this information on there, and that's where we know that Ros and I work with them to look at a whole recipe of coding to identify what the palliative care needs, and that's where we know that 3,700 people. And the model we can, I'm just compare back to some of the stuff as well, is with that, once we get our system set up, that system not only tells us what the numbers are, but it can tell us which the patients are as well. So we can move to a systematic approach. I need a bit of questions around the advanced care planning. It's not just a conversation once. It takes time to have those conversations. A person has to trust you, has to have time to reflect. And what a person wants when they feel they're 5, 10 years away from death is different to what them and the families want when they're 2 weeks away from it. So those sort of things have to be kept up to date all the time as well. But back to your review, it was the brief for that review was so narrow. I have challenged it constantly. But
Keith, do you want to come in?
So it's probably helpful to work how the ICB works, and I lead the work across North West London Better Care Fund, so I'm leading that particular review. The ICB's mindset is there should be a common core offer across all the 8 boroughs of North London, unless there is an overriding population health need that justifies variance from that. Okay. And that's so they start off from a position which is where you got to here, that there should be a common offer. Yeah, so a bit like we've got 8 carbon cutouts of each other. Don't shoot the messenger. That's the mindset that there is. What we successfully do is use the data to say, yep, it's one of those yes and conversations. Yes, of course, we want a common offer, but you need to recognise the differences that each borough has, because they have different population health characteristics. And that's what we do to argue the difference. We always say, well, actually, Hillingdon is different because, and here's the data, here's the reasons. And the ICB respond to that. I have to say, they do respond when you back it with data. It's why I like data, as opposed to, well, we think we're different without being able to articulate it. So that's what we've tried to do, and quite a bit of the model that North West has developed comes out of the work that we've done here in Hillingdon. So that's what we try and do, Councillor Cawthorne. We always start from that point and then argue why we are different and why we need a slightly different solution. And bluntly, it's the way we work the system, it's the way we work the new system. But that is the mindset of the ICB, and we need to understand that, because that's how they approach everything that we do.
So, Philip, Councillor Cawthorne, before you have your second question, I'll just come in very quickly. I mean, I have the privilege of sitting on the North West London Chair Scrutiny Committee, where all the chairs of the different scrutiny committees come together and scrutinise the ICB once a quarter. And as you can imagine, a committee full of chairs, we only have 2 hours. It's amazing we actually get through the agenda with a committee full of chairs. But one of the things that I always push very strongly, it's probably the only thing I push because I don't have that much time to speak, is letting good people do good things in the places where they are. And you know, one of the reasons why the ICB, I think, should be more open to people doing things differently is because our culture within healthcare service provision in Hillingdon is very different to elsewhere. And rather than I battle to try and stop standardisation that brings us down, rather than, for the purpose of standardisation. But anyway, that's another thing that we can talk about another time, more details. But very quickly, am I right in thinking there's a consultation at the moment? And if so,
yes, there's a consultation. So
is there a deadline? Because what I would like after this meeting, I think, with some of the ideas and thoughts that we've come, I'm sure as a committee, we will come up with something that we'd like to contribute to this consultation. I mean, is there a closing date?
It's just I have to go out to public on it, and I've got to be careful. I've got another hat on. That the organisation that's won the tender to do the public consultation is Edge for All, Stocksley ST, so it's a Hillingdon organisation. And I should have really sort of emphasised as well is, despite the work that's going on to standardise it, we got agreement with North West London. We would continue to do what we're doing now, and as Keith's saying, they're using us as a petri dish to see how things work, and if it works with us, it gets rolled out elsewhere.
Okay, so from our perspective, if Nikki was able to draft something, we'd be able to look at it, maybe sign it off at our next meeting in October. That would be okay for responding to the consultation. And if we got a bit longer, then that would be nice for Nikki, because she'll have a bit longer to do the work. But because I think from today's meeting, I think it'd be really important for us to put a statement out there and respond to this consultation about stuff. Philip, you may have your second question, and I'll go to Councillor Nelson. Sorry.
Would you kindly excuse me? I have a
of course.
Emergency.
Of course. Thanks, Keith. Thank you very much. Councillor Cawthorne.
Yes. So just a brief parting comment on that. So I'm encouraged that we are looking to put a statement forward. From what I'm hearing from Keith, is I know he's just leaving the room. Hopefully the local ICB is going into bat for us as Hillingdon's voice within the wider group. I had always worried about a strategic health authority type setup coming into being, perhaps not necessarily working in our interest. So I trust that our health partners, our local health partners, are making those arguments alongside us. Just
Councillor Cawthorne, from what I see that they do.
Good.
So
okay, that's fine.
That definitely happens.
And just my second question, and Keith's gone now, so I might have missed the moment. So the sense I get from what's been said about people being held on to in acute hospitals is it's less of a funding issue, more of a culture issue, which is because normally we talk about the need to create budgetary headroom to make it possible to do things outside acute settings. We have this discussion with things like mental health, don't we, and all kinds of other things. So my sense is that's less the case in this instance. I mean, that's observation. You may want to comment on that, perhaps, Steve or someone else.
In a sense, the impression we're given is if referrals were happening more often, the money would follow it, and then more money could be spent on palliative care. Is that sort of a good summary?
It is, and as Keith said, I've had 2 meetings this week with hospital senior management about how do we move this forward to an integration team, how do we move forward in terms of to a different model in terms of end of life care identification. We're very active at the moment on it, but it does take time, and I'm aware that I've been in this post for 11 years, and for 10 of those I've been trying to move towards this. But the good thing about writing this paper was actually just recognising that we have moved quite a few bits forward, and sometimes you forget, because your head's down, you forget that actually when we compare up what we've got in Hillingdon and where we've got to compared to other parts of North West London, we're not doing too bad.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Some of what I needed to, the question I was going to ask has been, some of it has been answered, but Keith is gone because this was supposed to be for this question to Keith. How are they enabled? How is the different services? How is the HHCP enabling the different services to signpost and stop to be signposted and stopping the entrance via A&E, so stopping people going in from A&E. How is that coming together? Because it's obviously there is more beds needed, and Steve is saying that we're working towards that, but from your paperwork, it's coming out that we need more beds either in the nursing home or more beds in a hospice setting. Yeah. What is the HHCP, because he is the responsible head for that, going along with the ICB in regards to getting that sorted? Because if that doesn't get sorted, then the culture change wouldn't happen with the clinicians, because the clinicians needed to know. Sometimes the clinicians do look at that, but the beds is not available for them to send those people to who really needs palliative care, and they end up in hospital beds that they shouldn't have, because the facilities required is not available for them to send, discharge someone with palliative care quick enough to get that special care that they need. Because what came out from our visit on Monday is people are not aware of who to contact to give them that respect that they need, and that is what they're asking for. If they didn't know, then they end up in A&E, they end up in a hospital bed that is not what they require. They end up being treated medically, and they don't need it to be treated medically because they know that they're at end-of-life care. So, Keith is gone, but I would really like him to answer that, because it's a fundamental thing to enable that change to happen, so that residents in this borough and straight across the five boroughs that he represents, it needs to be addressed. And we can go round and round, but if the beds are not there, or if investment hasn't gone into those beds to provide more beds, because we're looking at the percentage of nearly 80%.
So, Councillor,
so
I think in terms of your
that
point,
that is my concern.
I'm sure Nikki's captured your point in question, and will email Keith to get a response from him, because Keith will respond by email. As a sort of last comment, I think, actually Councillor Bells wants to come in. So, Councillor Bells, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been fascinating listening and a fascinating discussion. And I apologise I couldn't make it on Monday, but I had other things I had to do. Just interested on the phase 2 about this partnership with Brunel University, academic hospice. Is that? Can you explain more to the layperson?
Thank you for that question. So, Brunel have got land. They also are constantly looking for placements for their new medical students, their nursing students, pharmacy students, social work students, and we've entered into a discussion about potentially a hospice facility on their site, but it will be what Steve described as a hybrid hospice. So it would have the acute palliative beds, which we provide currently at Michael Sobel, but it would have some longer-term beds, which would be funded in a different way. The hospice would benefit, or the unit would benefit, from having placements, extra staff, better awareness, and the university would benefit by having somewhere for their students to learn. So we think it's a win-win, be an expensive project to build, but we think it would be a sustainable model for up to 60 or 70 beds in the future. And they're very interested. We can't proceed at the moment because we don't have the money to support the project plan and the work that would need to go into developing the plans, but they're very keen for us to stay on board.
Right. Okay, so I've got, and definitely very interesting to find out more about this, and we will be looking at this issue further. So I've got Councillor Cawthorne wants to ask something. I've got Councillor Punja wants to ask something, and then what I suggest is we sort of shut the meeting there. Don't shut the issue, obviously, but if everyone else is happy with that, is everyone else okay? Right, Councillor Cawthorne.
A very quick one. I've read the report, and I might have missed it. I don't get any sense of any kind of time frame for some of the more deliverable aspects of this. I appreciate some of them are high level, conceptual, long term. Can you give us any sense of that, or is that elsewhere? Can you refer us to it, Steve?
The reality is the time frames are not there because they're not definite at this point in time. We've got too many moves of elements to it.
Fine. Councillor Punja.
A final comment. I can see the amount of work that you have put in, Steve, in the decade that you've been working in to try and move the clique of the NHS towards your direction. And Michael, don't be bullied out of the NHS because they have money. And please keep trying, because I'm still going to go back to less than a fifth of the money comes from them, and there has got to be more that they can do. And culturally is one thing, but I just still feel that more awareness. What are they doing in terms of raising that awareness so those clinicians are making the right decisions? Because the NHS is treatment based, and what you're doing is care based, and that has got to be the decisive factor. Please carry on.
Can I just factually, our care costs are about 5 million, and we do get nearly 2.5 million from the NHS, so they're meeting about half our costs at the moment. That 300,000 was over and above our contracts we had from the previous year, so it was new additional funding, which most of the hospices are getting something like 0.4% or 1% uplift. In Office London we got a bigger chunk, so I've got to be, we're doing something right, and I've got to be careful not to upset them too much.
So I think obviously tonight has shown that we as a committee have very strong views on this, and it's a good chance that there is a consultation going to be coming out, and so we can actually put those views down, feed into the consultation, and have them public. And again, this is an issue obviously that we are going to come back to. I'm pretty sure of it. So I think just before I sort of wrap up this part of the meeting, I mean, as you've been kind enough to come here and answer our questions, is there anything else you would like to leave us with before you head off into the night, or are you all happy?
Can I say?
Yep, you can.
First and foremost, thank you for your time, both on Monday and also today. Thank you for your questions. I think the questions have all been good, and that's not being patronising. That's actually, good questions actually help us. It's also good to hear the support and the encouragement. And I think it's difficult to say, but there are emotions that are attached to a building. Those emotions that are attached to a building, we've tried to work with people to try and take those emotions away and explain it's all about the service, and that's what we are all about. If that's what comes out from today's meeting, I feel we will achieve something. I hope it has come out through this meeting, and I'm glad actually that people have realised, and Keith and Steve have been working very hard to progress things along, and there has been movement. Personally, I'd love to see it quicker.
Steve?
Yeah, just thank you for inviting us today and the questions, etc. And for those who visited on Monday, for those who didn't visit on Monday, there's an open invitation to come and see our services. And because, to be honest, it's not until you actually have contact with the services and meet the families that you really understand the importance of palliative care. It is. It's every day for me, every day for Ros, but it is. I'm constantly in all of our staff who manage to keep supporting positively every day, which most people would find really difficult. It's a calling rather than a job. Yeah, and that invitation is for any councillors who want to come as well.
Yes, I'm very struck by Councillor Nelson's last comment about A&E. I think the coordination of care and having one number to ring would stop people going to A&E for things like they need an urgent commode. People are turning up to A&E, getting admitted because of a simple lack of equipment. We think our coordination centre, PICS, should go from strength to strength. People will learn the number earlier and ring that instead of 111 or 999. Yes.
Yeah, and to be fair, the experts within A&E, for example, should know that as well because it'll help them. But anyway, I am going to draw this to a close right now because it could go on forever, and we will come back to it, and we will certainly be responding to the consultation. And so you're free to leave. We've got some other business which you can stay if you want to, but I'm sure you won't need to. So thank you very much. Okay, all right, okay. This is just to say that item 6, the 2025-26 budget planning report for services within the remit of the Health and Social Care Committee has been delayed, and this is because we have a newly appointed Corporate Director of Finance who is considering future financial performance and how it is reported to members. So once that's been done, we will get the information, we'll get to look at it, and hopefully it'll be presented to us in a very clear and good way. Okay, so I'll move on to item 7, which is the Cabinet Forward Plan, monthly plan. Does anybody have any comments? No? You're all happy with that? Excellent. Item 8, the work plan. So, Nikki, do you want to talk about the older people's plan?
So if members look back at the previous items, so agenda item 7, Cabinet 4 plan, on that 4 plan, the annual older people's plan was due to go to Cabinet in November. Cabinet have moved it to December, so moved from November to December so that members of this committee can have the annual report come here first to our November meeting, so that members can comment on it before it then goes to Cabinet. Okay?
Thank you, Nikki. Councillor Cawthorne.
Yes, I just want to add something quickly that I had shared by way of email to the entire committee in the context of the CQC assessment, which we will have reported back to us at some future date later this year. My point really was to say that we perhaps use that as an opportunity to ask ourselves whether what we're getting in terms of information from adult services is fit for purpose to enable us to discharge our due diligence role as a committee in scrutinising. Now, the answer to that question may well be yes, it's fine, but I think it's worth asking in the light of what's presented to us. So that's just a suggestion for consideration. I just wanted to float it here now, that's all.
Thank you. So, I mean, what will happen is when the CQC publish their report, and I'm guessing it'll probably be end of October, beginning of November, but I don't know. Just from when I talked to them about it ages ago, that's what they're planning to do. We will get the cabinet member and the director of health and social care to come and speak to us about the report. So obviously within that, the issues you raise I think are very important, and you will have a chance to question them about that if you think it's necessary. And then we as a committee, I think that report will be very important to us in terms of deciding how we scrutinise adult social care in the future, because obviously the CQC are going to do a very in-depth job. So, no, thank you for that suggestion, and we'll take that on, and yeah, we'll see where that goes. Anybody else got any other views on the work plan? Are we happy with it at the moment? Excellent, okay. Does that mean I can draw the meeting to a close? Excellent, the meeting is finished.